The Nigerian economy was the focus of discourse at the September edition of Nigeria-South Africa Chamber of Commerce breakfast meeting in Lagos. Senior resident representative for the International Monetary Fund in Nigeria, Dr. Amine was the guest speaker, looking at the topic, Nigeria from fragile to stable growth. It was an opportunity for stakeholders to gain insight into IMF's view on recent developments in the Nigerian economy and the pathway to attaining economic stability. At the end of his presentation, the IMF senior resident representative responded to some of the questions raised in an interactive session with stakeholders.
Our analysis is that under current policies, knowing you have elections, knowing what has been implemented, is that the growth rate in 2018 will likely be about 2.1%, and the growth rate in 2019 around 2.4%. This assumes that oil production is staying at 2.1 million barrels a day next year, and that agriculture, recovers a bit. Now, that's one scenario. Now, you asked about 2-3 years down the road. Well, it all depends what happens. If the economic recovery and growth plan and some of the policies I described in my presentation are implemented, then we can have, the same growth rate that I showed in the adjustment scenario, which can be all the way to 5%. So it depends on the mix of policies that are going to be implemented at that time. So that's really, I guess the answer is it depends on which one. But if just implementation of the ERGP can get you to that growth rate. And here I come back to one of the questions that was asked first on the revenue, what are the details? How can we get there? Well, on VAT, one idea would be to maybe increase the VAT threshold. Right now there is no threshold, it's 0, which means that you are controlling everybody has to pay VAT. But some businesses really don't have, in a lot of countries in the world you have a threshold, let's say, hypothetically $40,000, $50,000. Then below that you don't pay. Above that you pay. But now it's a much larger segment, it's easier for you to verify compliance, and it's easier for you to... Now, second thing on the VAT is that the VAT in Nigeria, it's something like the capital input is also not refunded. Usually VAT, it's a value-added system. And if you don't have that, then almost operates like a general sales tax. So it's also good to have the credit mechanism working. And then, it's good to also, on tax administration, that all of these be electronically filed. You have the ITAS system used, then you can cross-check with other agencies. This is how you catch when something is not working. And that works for VAT and also others. So concretely, and the FIS and its chairman are working on some of those initiatives. I think they'll start paying fruit at some point, because as they modernize the administration. Now, linked to that is the idea of, there are also a lot of tax exemption and incentives that also exist. But I cited to you earlier some of the 10 reasons for doing business in Nigeria and some of the constraints. Well, I haven't seen in there one of the reasons, I would come to Nigeria because I received tax incentives. If you were to solve power, infrastructure, some of the other constraints, that would already attract some of the investment, and you won't have some of the foregone revenue. And that comes back to the question on, are these revenue needed to attract investment? Well, if you have, public infrastructure in place, whether it's roads or etc., then that facilitates some of the private investment. But let's not forget, and I think, thank you for reminding me, all of these reforms are really there to facilitate the private sector as the engine of growth. This doesn't mean that the government with 10% of GDP of spending, whether state and federal together, is going to be the engine of growth. But it can facilitate by increasing public investment. And, mobilizing capital, you also have pensions, you have a lot of these, the equity market, the bond market, corporate, now you have CP paper with some of those corporates that are doing that. And PPP is obviously one initiative to boost. And there's been a few PPPs. I think the framework still needs to be put in place, and it's important to look at PPPs not as a way to just boost investment without going through fiscal, but to make sure that you evaluate when you do a PPP whether it's worth it and what would be the ultimate cost for the government. Because if you do a government guarantee, at some point, if this doesn't materialize, then we found in many countries that the contingent liability will come back to fiscal.
Dr. Mati speaks further on factors that will enable stable economic growth in Nigeria.
For growth to be sustained and to be high, it's important to implement the policies under the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. And a lot of them incorporate the idea of non-oil revenue mobilization to increase fiscal space for priority public investment. Keeping monetary policy tight so that inflation is in check. With low inflation, you can have stable growth. Unifying the foreign exchange market to make sure that a more flexible exchange rate is supporting growth, a strong banking sector, and last but not least, it's important that structural reforms be implemented, power sector recovery plan, anti-corruption efforts be sustained to make sure all the progress on doing business that have been commendable and done be continued to ensure that growth goes to a higher level. This is all part of the ERGP, and as I said, it's important that the whole package of policies be implemented to arrive at that level. Thank you.
Nigeria's current 1.5% GDP growth level is fragile and below its population growth of 2%. The IMF believes that fiscal policies like a growth-friendly consolidation based on non-oil revenue mobilization and structural reforms, amongst others, will put the nation on the path of economic stability.